Hello everyone and welcome to another video here on RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. Now, just two small things before we get started. First, an apology. I haven't uploaded in over 2 weeks. Actually, I got food poisoning and a lot of the blood vessels around my eyes burst. And I know many of you come to this channel for horror, but not that kind of horror. After that, I was out of town for an interview, so apologies for the delay. The second thing is good news. So this video is for the final scenario in Pagan Publishing's The Golden Dawn. But the story in this scenario is continued in two other supplements. The out of print and very difficult to get Whisperer magazine number 1 and number 2. But fortunately, I've managed to get my hands on them and I will be reviewing them very soon. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the scenario Sheela-na-gig, or Sheela-na-gig. The investigators need to find out about a missing acquaintance, but what they discover is much bigger than they expected. That's all I can say for now, so here is your spoiler warning. If you're a player who hasn't played this already, please stop watching now. You don't want to ruin the mystery. But do send your keeper this way, and you can still like and subscribe if you've only watched until here. I won't mind. If you've already played it, or if you're a keeper thinking of running it, well then, let's get down to it. Okay, so some background information. So Sheela-na-gig, or Sheela-na-gig, are carvings that seem to have originated in France, but are now found mostly in the UK and in Ireland. They involve a crudely carved woman holding open her overly large, kind of distended vagina. These are theorized to ward off demons and evil, and they're usually found over the threshold, over the opening arch of buildings, mostly religious buildings. There's a bit of disagreement on when they started, if they were originally Christian symbols or pre-Christian pagan symbols, which were then adapted to Christianity. As I mentioned, they can often be found on churches and cathedrals, and it seems more likely to me that it would have been originally a pagan pre-Christian thing, and then it was adapted to Christianity just as a holdover from the pagan beliefs. And that is the approach that this scenario will take. If you want to find out more about that, I highly recommend this video here, which is very informative. You don't need any of this information for the scenario, but a little background is no harm. For the purposes of this scenario, Sheela-na-gig is widely accepted as a symbol of fertility. And the hidden connection there is that, for this scenario, is that it is a representation of Shub-Niggurath. So this scenario is connected to the scenario Hell Hath No Fury. If you remember, in that scenario, Black Annie was able to regain some of her power because a Randolph Northcote had cut down the last of the sacred oaks, which was forming an elder sign on that forest. The players may not have found that out, or they may have found that out. But the reason Northcote was doing this was to recapture the body of King Arthur, who was also interred there at St. Michael's Chapel as well. Northcote had discovered King Arthur's resting place and figured out how to revive him, and he wanted to bring back some power to the British Empire. But when he discovered Arthur, he realized that King Arthur is not as civilized or as noble as Northcote thought, and he is certainly not a Christian, which Northcote would like to promote. So actually, Arthur plans to blow up St. Paul's Cathedral on Easter Sunday as a symbolic start to his dismantling of Christianity and a return to the pagan gods, notably Sheela-na-gig, who is really Shub-Niggurath. To this end, he has used the Holy Grail to revive some corpses and hide them in the catacombs of St. Paul's Cathedral with plenty of explosives. They are now thralls to him and will follow his orders. Whether he is present or not, they will emerge on Easter Sunday and blow up the cathedral, unless the investigators can stop it. So that's the background information that you need to know. The scenario starts on Sunday, April 16th in 1899, and this is 5 years, give or take, after the events of Hell Hath No Fury. So King Arthur, has been up, resurrected for about 5 years. So one investigator, a survivor of Hell Hath No Fury ideally, gets a visit from a man claiming to be Northcote's servant. And he wants to arrange a meeting for the following day. However, the next day, Randolph Northcote does not arrive. Instead, a man calling himself Arthur Northcote, Randolph's brother, and someone else they may recognize, Alistair Crowley or Frater Perdurabo, turn up. The characters may know that Crowley is of some questionable character, and also may know him as a member of the Golden Dawn. So once admitted to the investigator's house, Crowley will explain that Randolph has gone missing and that they found an appointment with the investigator in his diary. They're hoping that the investigator can give them some information to try and help them locate Randolph. Really, though, the investigator knows pretty much nothing, so they can't say much. Maybe they have a little bit of information from Hell Hath No Fury, and they can choose to share that or not. But basically, Arthur will start getting a bit annoyed at this, thinking that the investigators are holding back information. But Crowley kind of plays peacemaker between them, and Crowley reminds the investigator that they have no reason not to help him, Crowley, who is a fellow Golden Dawn member, especially when assisting in the search for a missing former Golden Dawn member in Randolph Northcote. So he used to be a member a few years ago. What has happened, really, is that Randolph was worried about Arthur's plan to blow up St. Paul's and wanted the investigator to help. Arthur found out about this and killed Randolph. Then he revived him with blood from the Holy Grail, turning Randolph into an undead thrall under his command. So Arthur really just wants to make sure that Randolph didn't tell the investigators anything before he was killed. So nothing much can happen here, and Arthur and Crowley depart. But later that night, and in the middle of the night, Randolph decides to keep his appointment. So he is a thrall under Arthur's control, but he has a limited amount of mental freedom when Arthur sleeps. So he manages to find his way over to the investigator's place, and he breaks into their house, causing a big racket. This will either awaken the investigator, or it will awaken their servants, who will then awaken the investigator. So when they come down, they find that Randolph has his neck cut open pretty badly, so he should be dead. He is. But because of this, he also can't speak. He does, however, have two things with him that he's very eager to give to the investigator. One is an ancient gold cup, which is the Holy Grail, but you won't be able to identify it as such. And the other is a painting. The painting shows a stone room with a pedestal in the middle covered in a hideous Sheela-na-gig carving. You can identify it as Sheela-na-gig if you make a successful occult or no roll. There is a man standing at the altar, and it is clearly Arthur Northcote, who was here earlier today. A signature on the painting identifies it as being painted by Melinda Price, who the investigators should remember from Hell Hath No Fury. But basically, she was a 16th century painter who focused on Arthurian series. How could a painting, hundreds of years old, depict a man that they met today? Randolph himself is not capable of communication due to, obviously his throat being cut, but also the shock of being killed and revived has messed with his mind a lot. Once the investigators start questioning him, this mental strain will awaken Arthur, who then, because of the mental connection, will become aware of the situation, and he will mentally order Randolph to do the following. So the investigators are questioning him, and suddenly Randolph will jam both of his thumbs deep into his eyes, blinding him, and this will cause some sanity loss. After that, he will start biting off all of his fingers, so that he can't possibly, see anything to identify, or he can't possibly write or anything like that again. He won't be able to tell anything. And after this, and all of this is sanity draining as well. After this, Randolph will just go completely limp, and he will appear to be just another corpse. So all of this commotion, or possibly the servants, have summoned the police. And the investigator now has a corpse in his living room, clearly been murdered with the throat cut open, and now dismembered with the gouging of the eyes and the biting of the fingers. The police will not buy any story which seems to say that the corpse broke in and then killed himself, because a quick investigation of the body shows that he's been dead for at least a full day. So it's not as if he just died. So they might get dragged in for questioning, or they might be able to settle it there, kind of depending on their credit rating and also how they answer the questions. But the story says, or the scenario says, unless the investigator is particularly stupid with their answers, they won't be getting arrested, but they will kind of be under the watch of the police. So, the investigators might come up and say, someone dragged him in here, or he's been missing, or maybe it's body snatchers and with a vendetta against us or something like that. Anything kind of reasonable, they can avoid being arrested. So up until this point in the scenario, it only really focused on one investigator, unless the investigators all happen to live together. Alternatively, if the investigators have a shared office, if they're investigators, you could use that for most of the scenario up until now. I would say for the best role-playing experience of this, either do, up until this point, do it as a one-on-one scenario with your chosen investigator, which sets up the rest of the scenario. So then you do this in advance, and it could be days in advance as well. And then when you're having the full scenario, you just take it from this point forward. Alternatively, you could have, everyone playing together, but make sure that more than just the one the one investigator is involved. Because this could kind of lead to quite a long time of them just sitting and watching. So continuing on with the scenario, it is now Tuesday, April 16th. So they originally got the meeting request from Randolph's servant on Sunday. He didn't turn up on Monday, and that's when they met Arthur and Aleister Crowley. And then that night was when Randolph came. So now it's Tuesday morning, April 18th. Arthur has a plan to go back to Beck Green and to St. Michael's Chapel to his coffin to rest for 3 days. This is kind of notably similar to Jesus's 3-day resurrection period. And again, we're talking about Easter. But before Arthur goes back, he wants to make sure that the investigators are unable to follow him and unable to disrupt his plans. For the investigators, there are 2 main places that they might think to go to search now. The first one is the Northcote apartment, so where Arthur and Randolph live. And the second one is Aleister Crowley, who has kind of inserted himself into the adventure. So if they go to the apartment, there is not much that they can find. Arthur has departed hastily, which, draws a bit of suspicion onto him. The servant Daniels, who came to the investigator's apartment at the start, has not been working for them long. It actually says different lengths of time in the scenario. One place it says 4 weeks, and another place it says 4 months. Have it whichever one you want, but just decide which one, because if the players notice a discrepancy, it might throw unnecessary suspicion on Daniels. He won't let them into the apartment unless they think to bribe him. He hasn't been there that long, so he's not super loyal as well. If the players do get in, if the investigators get in, they find some information that will only really make sense later. But it appears that Arthur has been spending the last few years learning modern English, British history, modern technology, and science and stuff like that. Arthur's bedroom is untidy, and there's a number of things around, but definitely good to point out that there is a popular history book on St. Paul's Cathedral. Again, don't draw too much direct attention to this, but definitely make sure you mention it here as it is an important link. Randolph's bedroom, on the other hand, has been ransacked and there's nothing to be found there. That's all in the apartment. If they go to see Crowley, he knows very little, but he's very smart. He'll pretend to know more than he does and convinces the investigators to share their information in exchange for his. He knows the Northcotes through a mutual friend who he will not name yet. He is unaware of Randolph's death unless the investigators named Crowley when they were talking to the police. After the investigators have shared enough, he will tell them that he met the brothers through Marilyn Constantine, who is an occultist who runs a whorehouse in Soho. He will enjoy heavily implying that she practices sex magic, which, of course, the Golden Dawn forbids. So he's kind of trying to show his bad boy attitude. He says that Arthur and Randolph are both occultists, but Arthur is much stronger than his brother. And Arthur spends a lot of his time at the whorehouse, which is called the Convent. He will give the investigators the address, but he won't go with them. It's advised all throughout the scenario to avoid letting Crowley be too active in the case, because it could either lead to Crowley overshadowing the investigators, or if Crowley dies, then it creates kind of like that historical problem. Because at this stage, Crowley is just at the beginning of his infamous occult career. So all of this is going to lead you to the Convent. This is, again, a whorehouse run by Marilyn Constantine. She is a priestess of Sheela-na-gig. And so an occultist, but not an evil occultist either. She believes in the empowerment of women and is very influential. The women that work for her are very well looked after, and they deal with very high-end clients. So even despite, the huge level of influence of some of the clients, Madame Constantine is in complete control over everything that goes on in the convent. She practices sex magic, which again is forbidden by the Golden Dawn, and she allowed Arthur to keep residence in the convent, and he sometimes had sex with her girls. Madame Constantine was able to benefit from his sexual power. There's no detailed information given here about how sex magic works, but I don't think you need to know it anyway. She also loaned Arthur a powerful artifact of Sheela-na-gig, which it was the Holy Grail. She is vaguely aware that Arthur has a plot to disrupt the Easter service at St. Paul's, but she doesn't know the details. Now, so that's what the Keeper knows, but what the investigators learn really depends on when they come to visit the convent. If they get here pretty quickly, they'll talk to Madame Constantine on Tuesday. If they delay, or they just take a long time researching, then it will probably be Wednesday. Tuesday is going to be quite fruitless. She won't reveal anything initially. If the investigators reveal that Randolph is dead, she will finally admit that she knows the Northcotes, and at this stage she will directly ask the investigators if they are members of the Golden Dawn, because Randolph mentioned something to her that he was going to reach out to members of the Golden Dawn. If the investigators ask about Sheela-na-gig, she will happily share information about it. But that is pretty much all you're going to get out of her if you visit on Tuesday. She'll kind of deny any information about anything else. But that's pretty much all you'll get out of her if you visit on Tuesday. She'll kind of deny knowing anything else, because she doesn't really want to get on the wrong side of Arthur, if he hasn't done anything that terrible in her eyes. But everything changes on Tuesday night. Arthur is now taking some of the steps to disrupt the investigators. He casts a bloody version of the ritual Summon and Bind Parasite, and this version of it requires a human sacrifice. So Arthur will write the name of each investigator that he knows, and he will put it in the hands of the victim as she dies. One victim for each investigator that he knows. He will certainly target the investigator that Randolph reached out to directly at the start, and any others that were present at Beck Green during Hell Hath No Fury, based on any notes that Randolph took in his diary. If this involves all of the investigators, it might be worth having Randolph misspell one of the names, so it didn't actually affect them. Because if you have some of them affected but not the others, and then you can find out, why it was, maybe then you'll realize that it's a spell. So it's like it affected A, B, and C, but not D and E, and then you find out that there were like letters written or notes written with your names on them, but these names were incorrect. Then you start to think it's a spell, definitely, and he knows our names as well, so it's kind of an intimate one. But as they may have found out, Arthur has been brushing up on modern British history, if they visited his apartment, and he read about Jack the Ripper. So he chose prostitutes as his victims, knowing that it would cause a panic and the police would be eager to get to the bottom of it. His hope is that it will delay the investigators long enough. But he didn't count on one thing. Madame Constantine has psychic abilities and unwillingly takes the point of view of each of his victims, who are all prostitutes. And she is a very benevolent madame, I guess, who runs the brothel. She really cares for the prostitutes, so this really upsets her deeply, and she is now furious with Arthur. When Arthur comes back to the convent, she demands that he takes all of his stuff and leave the convent for good, and they have a bit of a fight there, verbal fight. Now, if the players return to see her in the convent on Wednesday, she will be much more helpful. If by the end of Wednesday the investigators have not reached out to her, she will summon them, whether she met them on Tuesday or not. But before that meeting can take place, the players have something else to deal with. Two other things. The first is the astral parasites will begin attacking them in their sleep. So this is the outcome of the spell that Arthur cast. So this is the outcome of the spell that Arthur cast. There is a full box text section here explaining how the astral parasites will work. But basically they will be draining the the constitution score from the investigators every 4 to 8 hours. This won't wake the investigators, but they will feel sluggish when they do wake up. The parasites can be removed with a talisman of banishment, which the higher level Golden Order members may be able to do, or by going to the astral plane and defeating them in combat. Alternatively, Madame Constantine can remove them, or someone from the Golden Dawn can help them sort it out if the investigators can't figure it out themselves. Of course, they might also not figure out that they have the astral parasites for a while. The investigators are woken at 6 a.m. as inspectors call to their door and take them to the station for questioning. So what the investigators want to know, what the officers, the inspectors want to know is why a number of murdered prostitutes have slips of paper with the investigators' names on them. The investigator in whose house Randolph Northcote's mutilated body was found the day before will look particularly suspicious. During this interrogation, if the investigators reveal at any point that they are members of the Golden Dawn, the police will be especially interested and demand all of the information, including names of members and locations of meetings. And this will really start to occupy a lot of the investigators' time and essentially succeed in Arthur's, or let Arthur's plan succeed in delaying them. Of course, not all the investigators will be wrapped up in this scandal, only those whose names Randolph Northcote knew. And again, some he may have misspelled. If the investigators don't talk about the Golden Dawn, they will be released, but instructed not to leave the city for the time being. Again, this also successfully completes Arthur's plan, as they can't follow him to Beck Green, without raising a lot of suspicion from the police. But again, the investigators who were not involved in this, who didn't have their names written down, have the freedom to go. The investigators likely don't know, although they can find out, but they will be tailed and surveilled until Saturday, unless they do something suspicious to increase the length of the surveillance. At this stage, you can let the investigators do whatever they like, but keep in mind that official Golden Dawn meetings might draw unwanted attention. And if they go to a Golden Dawn meeting to get help with the astral parasites, for example, that might start to draw suspicion onto the other members of the Golden Dawn, which again is very bad. But if the investigators don't think of it, Madame Constantine will summon them for a meeting by the end of Wednesday. And as I mentioned before, this time she will be much more forthcoming. She says that she knows that Arthur committed the crimes, and she's very upset about it. Secretly, she knows not to confront Arthur directly herself, so she wants to maybe set the investigators on him first. She will give them some information that she knows about Arthur. He is a follower of Sheela-na-gig. He hates Christianity. He's planning some disturbance at the Easter service at St. Paul's Cathedral on Sunday, but she doesn't know what. And she believes that Arthur currently has the Grail, which she would like back, although probably the investigators have it. And if they say that they have it, she would very much like it returned. She can also say that Arthur had an apartment in the convent, and Madame Constantine will allow the investigators to look through it. But she will not testify to any of this to the police or in courts. So then, looking at Arthur's apartment in the convent, there is a painting on the wall. It's the painting of St. Michael's Chapel by Melinda Price that the investigators probably saw in Randolph Northcote's house back in Beck Green in the scenario Hell Hath No Fury. And so this should remind the investigators to go to Beck Green if they haven't already thought about it. A more thorough search of the room also reveals in one of the drawers a heavy metal key. Nobody knows what this is to. Maybe the investigators might think it's to his apartment in London. Other people might think it's something out in Beck Green or possibly in St. Michael's Chapel. But actually, and they can find out later if they're lucky, it is to a storage room in the catacombs of St. Paul's Cathedral. Inside that locked door are the thralls ready to detonate the bombs on Easter Sunday. So by now it should be maybe Wednesday night or probably Thursday morning. And there are two main places to go: St. Paul's Cathedral and Beck Green. Several of the investigators will be blocked from going to Beck Green due to the orders for them to stay in the city. So they can all go to St. Paul's, or they can split up and some go to Beck Green and the others go to St. Paul's. Or some other combination of that. So at St. Paul's, just one more thing as well. You can try to lose your tail as well if you're aware of it. So a few spot hiddens throughout the time might reveal that you have a tail, and then there's a few rolls to try and elude your tail. But once you go somewhere that they might be expecting you, like your home, maybe a known Golden Dawn associate, maybe, or the home of one of your fellow investigators, that's when your tail will pick back up again, so you might have to lose them again. So at St. Paul's, they can ask around and look around. No one recognizes the description of Arthur, and it will be very difficult to find any trace of him or to find the specific room, because the catacombs underneath St. Paul's are well kept and bright, but labyrinthian, so finding one specific room is almost impossible. However, if the investigators show one of the staff the key that they found in Arthur's room in the convent, the staff member can identify it as one of theirs, and upon checking the missing ones, can state which room it's for. If the investigators make it this far, they will open the door to a scene similar to that in the painting that Randolph Northcote presented them. So there is a pillar or an altar with a carving of Sheela-na-gig in the center. But also lying around, there are 6 corpses and 6 kind of homemade dynamite bombs. Although the thralls are instructed to come out on Easter Sunday and blow themselves up in the middle of as many people as they can during the service, they also have vague instructions to attack any intruders who come in before then. They won't use the bombs, though, and they probably won't pursue anyone who leaves the room, who kind of runs away. So unless you've managed to reach this combat without the staff, then the staff will probably call the police, which will cause more trouble and more delay for the investigators, especially if they're victorious here, because they will have, been mutilating corpses in the catacomb. It's not. So the thralls have already been killed and resurrected. So it's not unusual for dead bodies to be in the catacombs. What's unusual is that the investigators were mutilating them and dismembering them. So that's another delay and another kind of police investigation kind of thing that they'll have to work their way through. The other option they have is if they go to Beck Green. And as they make their way to the train station, the police will arrest anyone who's being tailed and has been asked not to leave the city. If you've lost your tail, you might be able to join here. So for the successful people who want to depart, it will take about 6 hours to get to Beck Green, first stopping off in Helmsdom. And the information is all given here. Beck Green is covered in a thin layer of snow, which kind of gives it this creepily quiet sense. They can kind of ask around, but no one really knows much there. If they go to Randolph's cottage, it's pretty much the same as they remember from 5 years previous. However, the painting that hung on the wall of St. Michael's Chapel is gone, and it's replaced with a painting of Arthur's final fight with Mordred, which is just like the cover of the book and what they found in the Black Estate ruins from the previous one. The painting of St. Michael's Chapel is gone, and it's moved to Arthur's apartment in the convent. If you go into the forest, it is not as malevolent as it was during Hell Hath No Fury, provided that the investigators were able to kill Black Annie in that scenario. So it's a creepy forest, but there's not as much craziness, and you are able to kind of, if you're going in this direction, previously it would kind of mislead you, so you would avoid the center of the deep wood. But now it's kind of back to normal. So the players should be able to get to St. Michael's Chapel with little trouble. When they get there, they will find, or they may notice, that there is a Sheela-na-gig carving over the entrance, and inside is the same headless corpse that is there from the 16th century, as they may have found in Hell Hath No Fury. Behind the chapel is an open stone crypt in which Arthur is resting. If the investigators enter the chapel, Arthur will awaken. He doesn't want to directly attack them if he can avoid it, so first he animates the headless corpse to attack the players. He might also sneak up and attack them with just a small dagger, I think. If you think this is too easy for the players, depending on how many of them make it there. You can also include a dark young of Shub-Niggurath, or two if you want. The final sentence in this section reads, the battle in the chapel should be very bloody. Allow investigator death to occur according to the dictates of the dice. Arthur is a truly legendary hero, and no mere mortals should stand up to him without loss. So if Arthur is still alive, whether he survived the attack or whether the attack didn't happen, he will return to London on Saturday night and check the state of the thralls. If the players have disturbed this, then he will retreat back to Beck Green to reconsider his options and plot something else. So if that happens, the players have kind of avoided the tragedy of this scenario, but Arthur will plan something else. If the players have not stopped Arthur or his thralls, then they will attack on Easter Sunday. There may still be time to intervene and reduce damage, but the thralls are instructed to kind of spread out among the congregation and surround themselves with as many people as possible before detonating the bombs, so as to cause as much destruction as possible. Arthur, if present, will then announce something to kind of announce his return and to demean Christianity. At any point, if the players manage to kill Arthur, his body will burst into flames and he will disintegrate. But he is not truly dead. He will come back another time. Details on how he survived and how to ultimately kill him are not included. So it makes sense that, he's a little bit immortal, but it might be nice to know that there's some way to figure out how to kill him finally. So, after the Easter Sunday event, if the players are present, they might have a chance to fight Arthur here, or they might learn of this later. But the biggest thing left after all of this is essentially the end of the scenario. The biggest thing left to deal with is the police. If the investigators have been quite clever throughout, they've managed to throw enough suspicion on Arthur that they might be able to get out of all of this. Alternatively, the worst case scenario is if they have blabbed about being in the Golden Dawn and there's a number of suspicious murders, tied back to them. This could bring about the destruction of the Golden Dawn Order directly because of the players' actions. This could also ruin a lot of the long-standing relationships that they've built up over the course of the scenarios. What happens after this is up to you. So that is the end of the scenario and the end of the book. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the extended campaign starts with Hell Hath No Fury, then it continues in Sheela-na-gig, and it concludes in the scenario The Once and Future King, which is spread over 2 editions of the Whisperer magazine. I will be reviewing them as well, probably just as one video because it's just really one scenario. I think that the whole idea of a Dark Arthur is very interesting and makes reasonable sense. There's a good explanation why they came to this conclusion in this book. And especially because the original historical data of Arthur is so vague. The romantic tales about, the Arthurian legends weren't created until long after his death. Tying him to more pagan beliefs and being anti-Christian is again great and a bit of a surprise, and it works perfectly by connecting Sheela-na-gig, which is, very much present in real life, and Shub-Niggurath, so tying the real life situation to the well-matched god there. That said, the scenario as written does have a few problems. It is very linear in the plot, and a lot of it involves splitting up the party. Now, splitting the party is not necessarily a problem, and is actually very good in Call of Cthulhu. But at the start of the scenario, you might be focusing on just one investigator for quite a while. And the final showdown with Arthur at Beck Green, is almost building up to this huge epic fight. Hopefully with the players having learned a lot and even some spells over the previous scenarios. However, the scenario is really trying to stop half of the group or more from being at the showdown. I think this could be a little bit underwhelming. Now, I know this isn't exactly the finale because Arthur will return later, but it almost seems like a big showdown that should happen. There is also a comment at the start of this scenario saying that it's quite necessarily long in the writing to explain the complex plot, but that the session itself could be played in a single 4-hour game. So it does mean that it's quite a bit of work for the GM to get through. I do think that the scenario has a lot of potential, and I think it can be a great finale to your Golden Dawn campaign, especially if your investigators have grown to feel very attached to the Golden Dawn as an organization, and if they've taken sides in some of the drama. To have that order, that kind of bastion, that constant that's been there throughout all their adventures and who they've made good connections with, who they've been able to look to for resources, to have that order be at risk and to have the downfall of the organization possibly caused by the investigators, that could be really, really brutal. The character of Madame Constantine is also a very interesting character, and other Gaslight scenarios include brothels with strong female leaders. So it is possible that the investigators might have run into her before, if you're taking other Gaslight scenarios and putting them kind of like in between these Golden Dawn ones. Overall, what I feel about this scenario is similar to how I feel about all the Golden Dawn scenarios. They're good on their own, but if you add in a lot of other Gaslight scenarios in between, for example, from Dark Designs or from Sacraments of Evil, that's when you would get a real sense of continuity. These scenarios from the Golden Dawn alone are good for introducing a few members of the Golden Dawn, but the Order is really mostly uninvolved throughout. You really don't use the connections, except as kind of a narrative device to get you involved in each of the scenarios. But if you can expand on that and kind of fill in the time gaps in between and build up the relationships, and also build up Christianity as an important part of your investigators' lives, then the potential downfall of this order and, King Arthur potentially trying to bring about the end of Christianity, this can be really meaningful to your players and create an incredible enemy in Arthur. Alright, so that is going to do it for now. I will be following up with a run-through of the finale of this storyline in the next video. So that's the Once and Future King from the Whisperer magazines. And then I'll be moving on to Sacraments of Evil and Dark Designs to continue the review of other Gaslight adventures. If you have a preference for which book I go with first, Dark Designs or Sacraments of Evil, let me know in the comments and let me know what your favorite one is, and I can start with that. Alright, so that is going to do it for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really means a lot to me. And if you know someone who would like the video, consider sharing it with them too. Alright, so that is it for today. I will see you guys next time. All the best. Bye.